Hello and welcome to The Big Fight. Gandhiji is back in the headlines in more ways than one over the last couple of weeks. If there was one thing that people have been talking about, it's been the World Cup. And then people have started to talk about a person who's been using very Gandhian methods, Anna Hazare, fasting for the Jan Lokpal bill, using the methods and techniques that were once taught by Bapu. And that at the time when there's also a demand on a book that's come out on Gandhiji. It actually has been banned in some places because of certain references it makes about Gandhiji's habits and things like that. So Gandhiji very much back in the headlines. Are his methods, are his ideals still of any relevance now in 2011 and going forward? That's a substantive subject of discussion today, and a great panel to help us go through it. Tushar Gandhi, gives us great pleasure to welcome you onto the program. Thanks so much for being with us. Sohail Seth, do you agree with Gandhi's ideals, Gandhi's methodologies? We'll be getting your views from it. Somebody who thinks that those methods are being used and can be used very effectively, Sandeep Pandey, former professor at the IIT Kanpur, but somebody who's got the Magsaysay Award in 2002 for emergent leadership. Shiv Vishwanathan, it's a pleasure to have you with us. You've been a professor in a large number of places. You've also written extensively, and not least about the ruckus over the recent book that came out on Gandhiji's life. Great to have you with us. Sam Miller, British journalist and author, now here in India. Wonderful to have you with us to talk about Gandhiji. And finally, Sunando Datta, former editor of The Statesman, frequent contributor to various publications such as the International Herald Tribune, somebody who's been somewhat against conspicuous consumption, but also doesn't think that Gandhian notions like cottage industry can always work. Thank you so much for being with us. Tushar Gandhi, why don't I start with you? The methods that were once used by Gandhiji in a different time, in a different place, against a different sort of an enemy, if I can call them that, still relevant today?
Oh yes, I think they're relevant. They're going to be relevant even 100 years later. Why not? Why not only in India? You know, India. You said enemy. In the Gandhian terminology, there is no enemy. You're just trying to improve your fellow human being.
So-called enemy.
So there is no enemy, but even beyond our shores, what happened in Tahrir Square in Egypt?
It's not that these movements are always non-violent. I mean, you're making a relevant point that people coming out onto the streets in mass processions, in a sense, is Gandhian, but sometimes it doesn't stay non-violent. In Libya, it's not been non-violent.
The 1942 movement also in India was not cent% non-violent. There was the violent movement that also went parallelly with the things, and the contribution towards independence was largely because of the mass non-violent movement, but the revolutionaries also had their role to play in it.
Okay. So a little later we're going to come to Gandhian ideals, but let's discuss Gandhian methods first. Still work, still have relevance, or increasingly irrelevant?
I think we have a bunch of thick-skinned people running this country. So if you go to them through the courts, if you go to them through electoral politics, nothing will happen. You will keep electing the same crooks you've elected. You will keep having dynasties in power. You'll have the same jokers running the country. My point is, we have everything to gain with Anna Hazare at the helm of this crusade. We have nothing to lose. But the point we can't get any worse than we are already today.
Sandeep Pandey, you often attended left-of-center gatherings, including, CPI-ML gatherings, and you've not always been critical of the Naxalite methods because you felt that they sometimes don't have a choice. Sure. Now, the Naxalites are also people who are protesting, but they're protesting in exactly the opposite manner to that which Gandhiji would have ever approved of.
Issues that are being raised by the Naxalites are definitely very genuine issues. They are the outcome of exploitation and corruption in the interior areas of this country for a very, very long time. And we must realize that some tribal living, far inside some jungle does not have the option that people like us have, the activists, who can go to the district headquarters and organize a protest. So their issues are definitely genuine. We don't support the method of violence.
Sometimes for a tribal in Bastar, he doesn't have the option of using Gandhian methods. He has to pick up the gun and shoot a policeman. Is that what you're saying?
Sure. To be more specific, I was talking to the CPI former MLA from that area, Manish Kunjam, himself a tribal leader, and we were asking him the reasons why the Naxalites were able to get support from that area. And he said 3 government departments, police, forest and revenue, they are essentially responsible. The exploitation that they carried out provided a base for the Naxalites to gain sympathy there when they countered the corrupt officials and the contractors. And, you know.
Shiv Vishwanathan, the problems in a sense are the same. I mean, across this country now there's a feeling of revulsion at corruption, at what we are seeing, you know, people in power just not bothering about what the average person is going through. This is just a microcosm of what's happening in other countries as well. The methods used to fight it?
Look, I think let's be clear. Social scientists are wet blankets.
Are you going to be a wet blanket out here?
Yeah. The Gandhi had a collection of methods. Yeah. It moved from sexuality to technology to politics. Anna Hazare has a method. So let's not equate the two. It is a Gandhian method. Sorry, I think it's time we get some facts straight.
Okay, would you like to elaborate on it? I think that's a fascinating point.
Anna Hazare did not experiment on the body. Anna Hazare had no theory of sexuality. Anna Hazare had no theory of the oppressor in the way Gandhi had. Because he wanted to actually rescue, the aim of English nationalism, Indian nationalism, was to rescue the British from modernity. It's a much more complex theory. To equate everything and say it's Gandhian, I think sometimes is a bit simplistic. So first, let's pay tribute to Anna Hazare where it deserves. It's a tremendous act of idealism and courage.
So you're saying...
Second point, corruption is much more complex.
Tell us about it. We've been trying to figure out how to deal with it for 70 years, maybe for thousands of years.
It's much more complex than sexuality.
We've been actually grappling with sexuality also for thousands of years, now that you mention it. But
corruption is complex.
So is sexuality. So as a matter of fact, sexuality.
Yeah, but then you need different kinds of tactics, and you need a psychoanalysis of those. Okay, very simple.
Okay, let's come to sexuality a little late.
You can't, what's the Lokpal bill going to do about the nature of the informal economy? There's structural questions which cannot be solved by exemplars. Exemplars can show the lead.
Okay,
but the battle of corruption is the long-range one.
Let's come to sexuality and all other Gandhian methods a little later, and Gandhian ideals in general, because there were all sorts, you're right. The message from Gandhiji was far more complex than just non-violent protest. There was his views on industrialization, for example. There was views on what society should be like, his views on what villages should be like. So yes, there's more complex issues, and we'll come to some of them later. But Sam, let's just get you in on this, on the entire issue of the sort of methods of protest against oppressions or corruption.
Well, I mean, I think there are a huge number of examples from Gandhian methods which are still relevant today, but they've got to be judged in terms of their particular circumstances. The hunger strike is an incredibly blunt weapon. You can use it. You can't use it again and again. And I think it's important to remember that Gandhi used it to control his own supporters in a way, as well as against the British, that it was very much a way of using his extraordinary moral command, which he had, and I can't think of anyone around the world at the moment who comes close to having that. So for that particular weapon, there's a real problem. I think there are lots of examples.
There's a related problem with that, you can say that, look, I'm going to fast myself to death. And if the reaction is, well, go ahead, who cares? Then
that's right. If I say I'm going to fast to death because I don't like something, who's going to bother? No one's going to bother. There are very, very, very few people who can pull that off.
I think in the larger, body of people of India, it's corruption and not necessarily the Lokpal bill. So he's actually attempting to get focus on that particular malaise, I would imagine.
I think our reaction to corruption is very hypocritical, because corruption is a two-way street.
Absolutely.
And at the moment, we're just being judgmental on the corruption that's at the high level. But how many of us in this audience also, I'd like to ask, has not attempted to bribe a traffic constable?
Let me just get you in on this point, on the entire issue of methods of protest as a Gandhian idea.
My historic memory probably goes back far more than any of yours, and I remember Gandhiji vigorously supporting the Indian army fighting in Kashmir. He didn't say that the army should go do satyagraha or passive resistance to resist the invaders. So there was this militancy. We can't talk of Gandhian methods. This was one Gandhian method, the fasting. And as was said by the British repeatedly, that Gandhi could hope to gain his ends through passive resistance and fasting against the British, because they obeyed the same codes, the same conventions. If India was ruled by the Germans, he wouldn't have had a chance. They would have just let him fast and die. The Quit India movement, I'm going to make myself very unpopular by saying this, but I think, however noble the ends of the Quit India movement were in 1942, much of the disorder, the rowdiness, the lawlessness in our urban cities, in our urban landscape, is because of the habits engendered by the Quit India movement. I said my memory goes back longer than any of yours. I remember the chant, Sarkar ke maal, pani mein dal. And it's still Sarkar ke maal, pani mein dal, or burn buses, burn trams. So these periods of disorder have left their mark on Indian life forever.
Who answered the interesting point? Do these methods, the aim may be justifiable, just as some of what the Naxalites are fighting about may be justifiable, but the methods that have come out from this actually do lead to a lot of chaos. I think that's the point he's making. We know this. Every time there are protesters, they may think they're following Gandhian methods, but they end up burning buses. He says in general, the minute anybody gets upset about anything, if India had lost the World Cup, there have been people who would have been burning buses in protest against that.
But when they did win the World Cup, there were people trampling cars. So, you know,
who objected to people trampling cars just because
that's how we behave?
But the British white Sarkar has been replaced by an equally British brown Sarkar. We must also remember
No, hang on. He is making a different point. He's saying that some of those methods are not necessarily good. Is that the point you're making?
That's the point. Tushar has a point when he says the Sarkar ke maal pani mein dal is directed at a similar kind of authority still.
Yeah.
So then we are in a state of confrontation, people versus authority, people versus government. So nothing has changed. The revolution continues, will continue, as we say in Bengal. Cholche cholbe.
As a sociologist, is this the reason why there's... And again, people sometimes have very different stances. When it's a cause that everyone supports and agrees with, like corruption, we say it's great. People should come out on the road. They should block traffic. They should do whatever they want. If it's something which the average middle class does not like...
Vigorously, Vikram, the corrupt are at the forefront of such causes, saying you can protest against corruption because it distracts attention from their own corruption.
Okay, that's one possibility.
Let me just connect 2 points.
Let me get Shivan, Sushant.
I mean, let me read it. Sarkar ke maal pani mein dal might be because of adulteration. I mean, there's a question of context.
Adulteration was by the traders, by the wholesalers and traders.
Let's not get diverted. His point is that...
No, his point is that any movement towards reform brings with it a certain period of instability which needs control. But that instability is structural. You know, when the state is the police, the revenue department, then the bribe is the first act of citizenship. Corruption is a mode of survival in this country because you cannot beat the forest departments and the revenue departments without the system of corruption. So the reform is much more complex than the protest you people are talking about.
Okay. Sam?
Yeah, I mean, what I wanted to say in terms of...
Can I just ask you, first of all, a structural issue that he's talking about, that we may deify protesters or say, oh, isn't it wonderful that they're all out on the streets, if they are protesting against X amount of issues. But otherwise, those same protesters, and Delhi is frequently besieged, for example, by protesters in the same place. Sometimes we say, oh, look at these guys, they're creating a ruckus and they're blocking our roads and they're causing a traffic jam and all of them should be locked up. And the other time we're saying, aren't these wonderful people following Gandhian methods? It's the same...
These are incredibly blunt weapons, and there are times when it's much more useful to use much more sophisticated ones, and Gandhi was quite capable of doing those. I think what's important here is that we're not trying to change behavior, and that was often what Gandhi would try and do with the hunger strike as a tool. Here we're trying to get a law passed, a law through, and I think, given our experience in India, say, of the dowry law, which is quite strong and totally ignored, or almost totally ignored, I'm worried that that's really going to demonstrate such an achievement if in the end we get that through.
Okay. Sandeep, to your mind, what's the best way to get change done? Mass protests a la Gandhiji, Anna Hazare, Naxalite type armed action, voting for the right people in elections, all of the above, none of the above. What's the best way to get change?
Yeah, I would slightly like to go back and take the points which are being discussed and then answer this. See, I think the comparison of the violence or the corruption, committed by the government people or the government, it cannot be compared, with what the people do. I mean, all of us have seen how slums where hundreds and thousands of people live are bulldozed. The violence is from the state, from the government, and whatever reaction is there from the people, I don't think it can be compared. Secondly,
not compared perhaps, but it also can't be justified.
Sure,
sometimes Naxalite sympathizers do this. Oh, it's violence. It's okay. The state has been violent. These guys are violent.
No, nobody.
You can't equate the two.
Nobody is justifying, and certainly the violence by the Naxalites. Personally, I don't support it. The organizations that I represent don't support it. But the first question that you had put up, I think the Gandhian tool is very relevant today. Because most of us would have seen from Tehsil level to district headquarters to state capitals, national capitals. This is a tool of the common person to protest.
The concept of civil disobedience, of refusing to obey authority, is it the same when you have a democratically elected government? You may not like the government, but it's democratically elected. Is there a difference between saying, oh, I'm not going to obey this government and I'm going to have civil disobedience, to a time when it is, ruled by foreigners or in a totalitarian state? Is there a fundamental difference which you should accept?
Well, civil disobedience as a concept is fine. I mean, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, others. But in India, when you have civil disobedience and you have the thugs and the looters come in and wreak their kind of violence, taking advantage of it, and there is no mechanism to stop it, to prevent it. Even civil disobedience, I would say, can verge on blackmail, on emotional blackmail. And that's not a good thing. What we need here are corrective systems, not protest, but correction. Now, so many people said they'd been bribed. Or they had bribed people. If they hadn't bribed, is there any court, any authority to which they can go for redress? Once when I was interviewing Rajiv Gandhi, he said, what we need in this country is a strong consumer movement. And I said, but consumer movement by who? If I have a problem, grievance, and I go to the police won't do anything. And I go to the Home Office, they won't do anything because they're all in it. Okay. So a consumer movement doesn't work.
Fine. Tushar, just want to get you in there. I want to turn to the audience after this and just get their sense on this before I move on to Gandhian ideals. You want to quickly respond to this? Civil disobedience can sometimes be emotional blackmail.
Yes, and it will also be myopic because, while we are in Delhi fighting or across the nation fighting for the Jan Lokpal bill, in 4 major states, new rascals are joining gangs of old rascals. Nobody is bothered about that. Look at the candidate lists in every state that is going to the polls. And you won't find, I don't think in all of them put together, you will find 10 people that you would really like to have even in this studio.
So is that the core problem? We don't have the right people to elect. Let me just turn to the audience out here and why you think that methods of protest like this are going to have an impact.
One thing to sir, I want to answer him, that he said corruption is a two-way traffic. Why it is a two-way traffic?
Well,
why
pay the bribe if somebody
why
takes
people
it.
are compelled to become the part of this corrupt system? Because people are very poor. Bureaucracy is corrupt. Politicians are corrupt. Yeah. Judiciary you cannot trust these days. We don't have trust in judiciary. Where to go?
In response to Tushar's thing, I fully agree with it. Essentially, change has to come when every individual changes. If we want corruption to stop, we have to stop encouraging corruption. Suhail would agree that if marketers need to be changed, consumers stop buying the product. And that's the way to change society.
Changing towards being corrupted.
Okay, this is the last comment.
Corruption has to stop from the individual level, but I feel that, it has to start from the political level, the police level and the judiciary, everything. It has to be combined effort.
Okay, I'm going to take a break at this point, and when I come back, I want to shift the focus of this discussion to some other Gandhian ideals, and that's what Shiv was talking about, that non-violence and civil disobedience or protesting was one sort of a Gandhian ideals. Let's just spend some time on some of the other ideals that have been discussed, been debated, and also the ban on the book. Is that something that Gandhiji himself would have approved of? We'll turn to some other aspects of Gandhism when we come back. Welcome back to The Big Fight. So we've spent a lot of time discussing protests and Anna Hazare type protests in the Gandhian style. Now let's just shift our focus to other aspects of it, because we've just had another major controversy when a book about Gandhiji has been banned in some states, and there's been a major furor about some of the comments in that, apparently about Gandhiji's sexuality and other things. Tushar, as his great-grandson, what do you think Gandhiji would have made of all this? Would he have wanted the book to be banned, or would he have said, whatever experiments I conducted were in full public gaze, I have no problems about anything being discussed?
I think he would have been very amused by the whole controversy and said, look, what all they find to ruck up issues. But
and so many years later.
Yeah, so many years later. But he would not have approved of the ban. I think he might have even gone on a fast against the ban.
Gone on a fast against the ban. Shiv, you were talking about Gandhiji's ideas, and as you said, he was very happy to discuss.
The question of the ban is too simple. Gandhi wouldn't have objected to the ban, so let's get it out of the way. But the question of Gandhi's experimentation with different kinds of bases, from sexuality to technology to knowledge, is far more complex. You can't ban those things. And I think that is what Gandhians are not facing up to. I mean, I respect the protest of these people. Why is it that no custodian of a major Gandhian institution has opened his mouth today? We are museumizing Gandhi. So the question of censorship is just a policing activity. There are wider intellectual debates. I think it will be more interesting if we go back to the kind of debates Gandhi had with Tagore or with Ambedkar. Let's open up that wider frame of issues. Then there's an excitement beyond protest, beyond ban.
Okay.
Otherwise, I mean, everyone's quite happy with the simplicity of protest and the simplification of the ban.
Suhail, get back to discussing those basic issues. What are your views on celibacy, for example?
I have none. I don't have any views. And I think sexuality is quite a personal matter. I mean, you know, Shiv keeps talking about sexuality and the complexities, and thank God we're not debating all of that. I think
you can, if you want to.
The tragedy is the guys who are banning the book are happy killing other people, killing other communities. But, you know, it's tokenism. So all these guys remember Gandhi twice a year. They want to believe that they are Gandhian, but do everything which is completely different.
It's like, so like in Munna Bhai, right? That so Gandhiji is a national holiday on the 2nd of October.
So when you get the opportunity to prove yourself more Gandhian than the others, you say, look, I'm going to ban the book.
It's more like...
I mean, I find it silly that Pratibha Patil doesn't serve wine to the French president in Rashtrapati Bhavan because we are abstaining from alcohol. I mean, everyone knows that either these ministers are drunk on alcohol or on par. One of the two. So, you know, the hypocrisy with which we treat Gandhi needs to...
Or their own breweries.
Or their own breweries.
You don't have to worry about Pratibha Patil. Gandhi would serve non-veg to Azad and other people. Yeah. So the question of, you don't have to go to the politician. The level of tolerance in Gandhi,
I think, was remarkable. I am the great-grandson.
Yeah, I mean, he's a result of him not believing in
little later. It wasn't... you became celibate a little later, I think it's the point.
We tend to impose our current values and our current sort of social inhibitions and prejudices on the past. And one of Gandhi's Quaker friends, Richard Simons, you may know of him, writes this, that when he first came to India after Gandhi's death, and he saw that Birla House had been decorated with murals that depicted scenes from Gandhi's own writing, playing a guitar, dancing with a woman. Next time he came, those had gone. Why had they gone? Because they offended middle-class Indian morality. Our Gandhi, the Gandhi we have built up, never played a guitar. The Gandhi we have built up and worshipped didn't dance with scantily dressed English women. So this is all part of our make-believe. I haven't read Lelyvel's book, so I don't know whether there's any truth in it, but I can see how that happened. I read a conversation between Smuts and Gandhi, General Smuts of South Africa, in Gandhi once. And Smuts asks, who owns Tolstoy Farm? And Gandhi says, Kallingback. And Smuts says, the old Jew who's a great admirer of yours, isn't he? I know all about it. Now, someone whose knowledge of the language is limited can interpret that in some ways.
But I have a broader issue, and Sunny, let me just come to you. Is there any reason why we also, partly as a reflection of all this, we also tend to deify all of our leaders? So Gandhiji, because he's the father of the nation, must have done everything correct, and everything that he ever said is almost gospel truth. It's like what used to happen in communist days with, you know, the writings of Marx and Lenin. Even whatever they said is therefore there and written in stone. It's not really necessary that we have to agree in this day and age with everything that Mahatma Gandhi may have said. For example, he had comments on industrialization. He said, for example, industrialization, I am afraid, is going to be a curse for mankind, exploitation of one nation by another, and so on and so forth. Today, in this day and age, we may not have those same views on industrialization.
And you said doctors are impoverishing the country.
Yeah, so there were lots of things that Mahatma Gandhi said which we may not necessarily agree with. It doesn't mean we respect him any less, but we can say that some of his ideas are not relevant anymore.
No,
is there anything wrong with saying that?
No, I would actually like to argue against that. And I think most of the things that he said, the question is not are Gandhian ideals relevant. I think we don't have any choice. Just take this example of industrialization. 60 years after independence, the parliament passes an act called the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act and bans machines being used in rural areas because they are a threat to the employment of poor people. Okay. Tell me how the same machines which bring comfort to our lives become a threat for the poor people of this country. And I think this is what Gandhi was saying. If you go
so you're saying those ideals are still relevant
very much.
Relevant even
very
now.
much. His basic.
So you're saying all of his ideas are relevant. Gandhiji also had a lot to say on austerity, for example, that, you know, there's enough in this world for everyone's need, there's not enough for everyone's greed. Formerly, men were made slaves under physical compulsion. Now they are enslaved by temptation of money.
I defy anyone to show me that quote in Gandhi's work.
No,
I think there's a problem. I defy anyone to give me the source of that quote.
It's interesting. The same Gandhiji had almost every industrialist as one of his closest friends or followers. He died in Birla House. He used to live in Birla House. I think it was Sarojini Naidu who said. It was Sarojini Naidu who said that it takes a lot of money to keep Gandhi poor.
No, first of all, the basic issue that we are saying, that in a sense, should Gandhiji's thoughts, ideas, views, his personality be treated in some way as sacrosanct, that you cannot really question it without in some way committing high treason? Is that the way he himself would have wanted us to remember?
A man who called his life an experiment, and an ongoing experiment at that. If we are going to crystallize and formalize and, his philosophy on 30th January 1948 and not let it evolve, then we are not understanding the man himself at all. You know, he was evolving
so very interesting. He kept on evolving, he kept on experimenting. He could have changed his views within 20 years.
This he did say, that if I have two divergent opinions on an issue, then the one that I say at a later date should be held as the truth and not the one that was previous, because I change with my experience. And have we allowed the so-called Gandhian philosophy to evolve? Have we allowed it to grow?
That's a great point.
But I must go back to Suhail's point. You know, the Sarojini Naidu thing has been touted too much. It didn't cost the government or the Congress party to keep Bapu in poverty. But all the Congress hangers-on who used to be with them needed their luxuries, so it costed more to provide for them.
Well, in that case, nothing has changed. The same Congress hangers-on need all that.
And he didn't live in Birla House. He used to live in the Harijan colony in Delhi. The Birla House was, he was shifted to the Birla House because the Birla House he was shifted because the Congress cabinet found it difficult to go to the Harijan colony to meet him.
Okay, that's unbelievable.
I mean, the deification of Gandhi is a kind of disappointment, I think, to so many people who still care about lots of the very different things and sometimes contradictory things that he said. I think the kind of almost hypocritical moral outrage we've seen on this, largely from people who haven't seen this book, is disturbing. But what's also disturbing is that they've picked up on one particular point, which is about supposedly him having some kind of homosexual relationship. And they haven't picked up on the racism at all. And I find that rather stunning, that people are offended by the suggestion that Gandhi may have been gay or bisexual. But the idea being put forward in the review of this book that he was racist doesn't seem to have encountered much resistance
we are a
or challenge
society. We don't care about it.
And that shows a worrying thing about the values
Because sexuality is not something that we discuss of our leaders. I mean, you won't have sting operations other than poor N.D. Tiwari, but, you know, even the media is hands-off as far as
we have all the DVDs floating around.
Yeah, but they don't show it.
But they're not discussed. He's right. He's right. The sexual habits of our nation's leaders are not discussed.
You know,
in
there was a
public.
particular prime minister who had someone living with him, but you never talked about it.
But that's correct. The point that he makes that there were other aspects of this book and other aspects that have come out about Mahatma Gandhi. You can call them revisionist or you can call them whatever, which have not often attracted attention. Should they attract attention, and should we be ready and able to look at all of those things and say, look, maybe this happened. I don't think he would have called himself a perfect human being either.
First, I've read Delaval's book.
Yeah.
I think it's a very sane book. And the word bisexual is not mentioned there at all. I think he uses letters from the public domain. Second, let's remember, every major reinterpretation of Gandhi in recent times has met with an almost authoritarian response. Sudhir Kakkar's book on Meera, the copies were burnt. Ashish Nandi's work on the psychology of Gandhi's assassination led to all kinds of protest. Let's first face it, the problem of understanding and reviewing Gandhi is the intolerance of the official Gandhians. Step one. You want to talk about censorship? Talk about the intolerance of... Wait,
political
official.
Gandhian.
Okay, you dub them any way you like. And unless you take both ends, this is not going to work. And second, let's not think Gandhi was naive on industrialization. Look, the public microphone that all of us are using was introduced for the first time in a Gandhian rally. Right. Second, when Gandhi went to Manchester, he turned around to the Brits and told them, if you run plants like this, no wonder the Japanese are going to beat you. This guy understood industrialization. Okay. He's not some naive fakir, damn it.
So is this something which, as all of them, many people seem to be saying, is it true then that at the end of the day, we're not really willing to really look at our own history to find dark chapters in it or raise questions about it? You had that same experience. You wrote a book on Sikkim which was almost unpublished.
My book on Sikkim was published, but
virtually banned.
This was suppressed through administrative channels. It will take too long to explain how. The courts and the administration did it. But India is not a monolithic society. You make a point about Indian society and the counterpoint is immediately valid. Right. So there are all kinds of views, and if some deify Gandhi, some malign Gandhi.
All right, fine. So we've been looking at two aspects
one
of...
thing. You haven't met his question. Again, the silence about race is stunning. Let's take that section. What Gandhi objected to was the nature of classification. He said he didn't want to be classified with the Kafirs because I think he was trying to make a point.
So you don't think Gandhiji was racist?
I think the racial element of that statement, because a lot of race is classificatory. It's a form of governance. And the silence about it, even in this group, worries me. If there are raw edges to Gandhi's work, especially in the South African period, you have to meet it.
Yeah.
Silence
have to discuss it.
Or censorship.
Is that correct that we should be in a position to look at, in a long life, there may have been lots of things that he said which were not correct, which were wrong, which he may have evaluated, changes in positions, and it did happen. There may have been major mistakes that he made. Calling off the civil disobedience movement maybe was a mistake. You know, there were lots of issues which you could look back at. Should we be ready and free and willing to do that?
Definitely.
And is that what Gandhiji himself would have wanted?
Yeah, I think Tushar has already made that point, you know, that as he evolved, he kept changing his views and decisions. But one basic thing I have been trying to say for a long time, the two basic values that Gandhi believed in, truth and non-violence. If you look at what is going on, in the entire world, I think most of the people still believe in these two values, and that is why the world goes on. Gandhi's deification may not be justified, but his basic values, I think, are very relevant.
All right, so truth, and as you were saying, Sandeep, truth and non-violence were the two central values that were the dearest to Gandhiji's hearts. Yeah. So in all probability, if he was here today, he would say, whatever the truth is what we should be willing to talk about, discuss, bring it out into the open, and not necessarily hide it. All right, we're going to take another break. When we come back, final thoughts from all of our panelists when we return. Welcome back to The Big Fight. We've been taking a look at whether Gandhian methods are still viable and feasible in today's society, in today's world, just as we are seeing being done by Anna Hazare. And also Gandhian ideals, are they still relevant? And also what he would have thought about things like the ban on the books. Couple of very quick comments from people who haven't yet spoken. The gentleman here.
He was learning from the lessons he took from his transition from childhood to youth, which he was experimenting with in the.
That's,
so in
that's
that,
the point.
yeah, in that sense,
yeah. So in that sense, evolving.
Yeah.
Lady here.
See, I think it was a threat mentioned to Gandhian philosophy that he's being deified. The personal threat which I have faced is that I am called an idealist, and all the idealist theories proposed by Gandhi are considered as utopian. Ideal is hypothetical, ideal is utopian. But to counter that, one line which Gandhi has said, that Euclid's line in geometry is also a hypothetical imaginary line, but we require that line, we require that ideal. So we require that ideal to achieve a goal.
All right, well said. The lady here now, final thoughts.
Gandhiji would have always been for the freedom of expression, and banning this book is nothing but, you know, curbing that freedom of expression of people. What are our politicians so scandalized about talking? Haven't they looked into themselves, what they've been up to? Have they really been following Gandhi?
Exactly the point that Sohail was making. You have no idea what most of our present politicians are up to. Final comments and thoughts from all of you. I'm going to start with you, Sanando.
Well, I'm interested that no one has picked up the fact of Gandhi's strong support for the Indian military effort in Kashmir. So it was not non-violence, it was not ahimsa all the way. When the cause justified it, he could be as militant as any other ruler. I'll end with, on the eve of World War II, when sort of Europe is in a frenzy, there was a chant which was very popular in England: Hitler with his brown shirts, riding for a fall; Mussolini with his black shirt, riding back against the wall; De Valera with his green shirts, caring not at all; 3 cheers for Mahatma Gandhi with no shirt at all. And he was one.
All right. Sam, final thoughts from you.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a problem for Gandhi fans, people who believe in his ideas, and that is, he said so much, and there's so much recorded of him that he's easy to trivialize. And I think what we've seen is part of that. I still think in that Gandhians need to be pretty thick-skinned, hold on to what they think are the most important bits of his thought, except that in many ways he was a man of his time, as well as someone who has ideas that are of great value to us now. To hold on to both of those possibilities.
And to accept that he may have been imperfect.
Yeah, accept that he learned, and his ideas, as we've heard today, evolved considerably over that period.
Look, I think we're surrounded by cliché. Stop being naive. Treat Gandhi as a heuristic and develop the ethics required for it. It's going to be a wild ethics. But it can't be done from the simplicity and the simplifications and clichés around this room. I don't care how unpopular I am. Don't confuse passive resistance with satyagraha. There's a gap. The Egyptians were not satyagrahis. Don't confuse Swadeshi with Swaraj. I think this kind of illiteracy of Gandhi, and let me be absolutely snobbish on this, will not do. It might facilitate certain forms of idealistic action. But as scholarship, Gandhian controversy is going to be much more controversial, and I don't think you're ready for it.
Sandeep.
Yeah, I mean, I think he may not have a very scientific, viewpoint, but he had a world view. And I think that, most of the things that he said, including, his statements on either Palestine or nuclear weapon, and if you look at it from the present point of view, they are so relevant.
Okay. Still relevant. Sohail?
Just the point is, what we've done is we've made a god out of Gandhi. We've put him in a little temple in our homes, in our parliament and all, and we worship him every day. We just hope that we can touch him.
Not necessarily every day, twice a year, 30th of January and 2nd of October.
And by association, be like him. That's the hypocrisy. So I'm saying get rid of that. Follow, even if you can, 10% of what he believed in and how he would have evolved, and we'd be a better country.
I think Bapu is trapped between an academician who wants everything defined and printed and idol worshippers who think everything is divine intervention. Bapu is somewhere in between those two groups, and we need to find that path. We need to approach him from that path, and when we find that Gandhi, when we find that Bapu, not Mahatma, Bapu, then we will find the answers.
All right, I think that's a perfect note to end this on. Thank you all so much for joining us. You've been watching The Big Fight. We'll be back again next week.